Throughout history, humanity has devised numerous methods of punishment and public humiliation, each reflecting the values and cruelties of its time. Among these instruments of correction, the standing stocks stand out as a particularly grueling device designed not merely to restrain, but to exhaust and torment through the simple denial of rest. Unlike their more common horizontal counterparts, standing stocks forced the condemned to remain upright for hours or even days, transforming the basic human need to sit or recline into an impossible luxury. This vertical variant of a familiar punishment tool reveals much about the evolution of penal practices and society's historical attitudes toward crime, punishment, and public spectacle. The concept of stocks as a punishment device dates back to ancient civilizations, with references found in Greek, Roman, and biblical texts. However, the standing stocks emerged as a distinct variation during the medieval period, particularly prominent in Europe between the 13th and 18th centuries. While traditional stocks secured prisoners in a seated or hunched position by clamping ankles and sometimes wrists, standing stocks elevated this concept literally and figuratively, forcing offenders to bear their full weight throughout their sentence. The device gained popularity during an era when public punishment served multiple purposes beyond mere retribution. Medieval and early modern societies viewed punishment as a communal affair, where the suffering of the guilty reinforced social norms, deterred potential criminals, and provided a form of public entertainment. The standing stocks perfectly embodied this philosophy, creating a spectacle that was visible, prolonged, and physically demanding enough to satisfy the public's expectation of justice, while remaining just short of the permanent maiming associated with more severe penalties. The standing stocks were deceptively simple in their construction, which paradoxically made them more effective as instruments of torment. The basic design consisted of a wooden framework, typically constructed from oak or other durable hardwoods, featuring vertical posts or a frame that held restraining mechanisms at specific heights. The fundamental components included a sturdy vertical post or frame anchored firmly into the ground or mounted to a platform. At neck height, a hinged wooden collar or yoke would clamp around the prisoner's throat, preventing them from lowering their head or reducing the strain on their neck muscles. Guys, can you help me to hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel? And it's my dream. Sorry for interruption. It's humble request. Let's jump into the video. Some versions featured additional restraints for the wrists, positioning the arms at uncomfortable angles that prevented any support or relief. The ankles might also be secured in holes or shackles at ground level, eliminating the possibility of shifting weight or moving the feet for comfort. What made this device particularly cruel was its precise engineering of discomfort. The height of the neck restraint was calibrated to force the prisoner onto their toes or into an awkward standing position that could not be maintained comfortably for extended periods. Every dimension was calculated to prevent rest, too high to allow full-footed standing without strain, too rigid to permit any leaning, and too secure to allow any relief through movement. Variations existed across different regions and time periods. Some standing stocks incorporated additional features, such as protruding pegs or uneven flooring beneath the prisoner's feet, making it impossible to find even momentary comfort. Others included weighted components attached to the restrained limbs, accelerating fatigue and intensifying suffering. In particularly sadistic applications, the device might be positioned in exposed locations where weather conditions added to the ordeal. Understanding the true cruelty of standing stocks requires examining the physiological and psychological effects of prolonged forced standing. What appears to be a simple denial of sitting transforms into a cascade of physical torments that intensify with each passing hour. Initially, the prisoner experiences manageable discomfort, tension in the legs, strain in the neck from the collar, and awkwardness in maintaining an upright posture without freedom of movement. Within the first hour, muscle fatigue begins to set in as the legs struggle to support the body's full weight without the natural shifts and adjustments humans unconsciously make while standing freely. As hours progress, the suffering intensifies dramatically. The calf muscles begin to cramp and burn from constant tension. The lower back aches from the inability to shift posture or lean. The neck, forced into a fixed position by the collar, develops severe stiffness and pain that radiates down the spine and into the shoulders. The feet, bearing constant pressure, begin to swell, and circulation becomes compromised. By the third or fourth hour, the torture becomes profound. The legs tremble uncontrollably as muscles reach their limit. The prisoner may attempt to shift weight from one foot to another, but the ankle restraints limit even this small relief. The neck collar prevents looking down, and the inability to see one's own body creates a disturbing sense of dissociation. Dehydration sets in if no water is provided, and the prisoner's mouth becomes dry as they gasp for air around the collar's pressure. Extended periods in standing stocks produced effects that bordered on the unbearable. Sleep became impossible despite overwhelming exhaustion, creating a torturous state between consciousness and delirium. The body's natural inclination to collapse was constantly thwarted by the restraints, creating a feedback loop of attempted rest and painful awakening. Prisoners reported hallucinations, temporal disorientation, and extreme psychological distress that lingered long after their physical release. Medical understanding of the effects reveals additional horrors. Prolonged standing causes blood to pool in the lower extremities, leading to edema and potential blood clots. The constant muscle tension can cause muscle fiber damage and severe cramping that persists for days afterward. Joint stress, particularly in the knees and ankles, can lead to lasting mobility issues. The combination of dehydration, exhaustion, and stress can trigger cardiovascular complications, making standing stocks more dangerous than they appeared. The use of standing stocks fit within a broader system of graduated punishments that characterized medieval and early modern justice. Different crimes warranted different durations and conditions of confinement in the stocks, creating a hierarchy of suffering that reflected societal values and priorities. Minor offenses such as drunkenness, petty theft, or disturbing the peace might result in a few hours in the standing stocks, typically during market days when public attendance would be highest. More serious infractions like repeated theft, fraud, assault, or moral offenses such as adultery or blasphemy could warrant sentences of 1 to 3 days, creating genuinely dangerous conditions for the prisoner. The public nature of the punishment was integral to its purpose. Standing stocks were positioned in town squares, marketplace centers, or church courtyards, anywhere that guaranteed maximum visibility. The imprisoned individual became a living lesson, their suffering serving as entertainment and education for the community. Passers-by were not merely permitted but encouraged to interact with prisoners, hurling verbal abuse, rotten food, stones, or worse. This communal participation in punishment reinforced social bonds while simultaneously isolating the offender. However, this public spectacle created complications. While authorities intended the stocks to serve as deterrent and retribution, the crowd's behavior was unpredictable. Sometimes public sympathy emerged, particularly if the prisoner was well-liked or the crime seemed minor. Friends and family might provide water, food, or words of encouragement, undermining the punishment's severity. Conversely, particularly despised individuals might face violence that exceeded what authorities intended, occasionally resulting in serious injury or death. The standing stocks also reflected class distinctions in justice. Wealthy individuals could often pay fines to avoid such public humiliation, while the poor faced physical punishment for similar offenses. This disparity highlighted the performative nature of public punishment. It was as much about displaying the social order as about correcting behavior. Beyond the physical torment, standing stocks inflicted profound psychological trauma that distinguished them from quicker, more violent punishments. The extended duration created a unique form of mental suffering that combined anticipation, endurance, and public shame into a devastating psychological cocktail. The anticipatory phase began before the prisoner was even placed in the stocks. Knowing one faced hours or days of standing torture created anxiety and dread that intensified the eventual experience. This psychological preparation paradoxically made the ordeal worse, as fear amplified every discomfort. During confinement, the prisoner experienced extreme vulnerability. Unable to defend oneself from projectiles, taunts, or physical assault, the individual was reduced to complete helplessness. The inability to control one's position, to scratch an itch, to adjust clothing, or to perform basic functions created a degrading sense of powerlessness. Many prisoners were forced to soil themselves, adding humiliation to physical agony. The temporal distortion of prolonged suffering made hours feel like days. Without the ability to distract oneself, check the time, or engage in any activity, prisoners experienced a warping of temporal perception that intensified psychological distress. The constant question, how much longer, became a form of torture itself. Public humiliation cut deeper than physical pain for many prisoners. The destruction of social standing, the exposure to mockery from neighbors and strangers alike, and the permanent mark on one's reputation could devastate individuals more thoroughly than the physical ordeal. In tight-knit communities, this social death might prove harder to recover from than any bodily injury. The standing stocks, like many public punishment devices, gradually fell out of favor during the 18th and 19th centuries as Enlightenment ideas about justice, human dignity, and effective punishment spread through Western societies. Multiple factors contributed to this decline. Growing awareness of human rights and dignity made public humiliation and physical torture increasingly uncomfortable for reformers and progressive thinkers. Philosophers and legal theorists argued that punishment should be proportionate, humane, and focused on rehabilitation rather than mere suffering or spectacle. Medical knowledge revealed the serious health risks associated with prolonged forced standing, making authorities liable for deaths or permanent injuries resulting from what was supposed to be a temporary punishment. As understanding of circulation, muscle fatigue, and cardiovascular stress improved, the danger of standing stocks became undeniable. The rise of prison systems offered an alternative approach to punishment that removed offenders from public view while providing what reformers considered more humane and effective correction. Incarceration allowed for longer sentences and more complete control without the unpredictable violence of mob justice or the health risks of physical restraint devices. Social changes also played a role. As societies became larger and more anonymous, the effectiveness of public shaming diminished. The communal bonds that made standing stocks a powerful social tool weakened in growing cities where neighbors were strangers and reputation was less geographically bound. By the mid-19th century, most Western nations had abolished standing stocks along with other public punishment devices like pillories and whipping posts. The last recorded official use of standing stocks in England occurred in the 1860s, though isolated instances persisted longer in some rural or colonial settings. Though standing stocks have vanished from legal punishment systems, their legacy persists in multiple ways. They remind us of humanity's capacity for cruelty disguised as justice, and the ease with which societies can normalize suffering when framed as righteousness. The device also offers insights into changing conceptions of punishment, dignity, and human rights. The transition from public physical punishment to private incarceration represents not merely a humanitarian advance, but a fundamental shift in how societies conceptualize justice, deterrence, and social control. In contemporary times, the standing stocks serve as a cautionary symbol in discussions about prison conditions, interrogation techniques, and human rights. When debates arise about stress positions, prolonged standing during interrogations, or other practices that echo historical tortures, the standing stocks remind us how easily enhanced methods can cross into cruelty. The standing stocks represent a dark chapter in the history of human punishment, embodying a time when justice was public spectacle and suffering was community entertainment. Through their simple but effective design, these devices transformed the basic human need for rest into an instrument of prolonged agony, demonstrating that sometimes the absence of violence can be as cruel as its presence. Understanding such historical practices serves multiple purposes. It provides perspective on how far human rights and justice systems have progressed, while simultaneously warning against complacency. The standing stocks remind us that societies can normalize tremendous cruelty, that public approval does not make something right, and that the treatment of prisoners and offenders reveals fundamental values about human dignity and worth. As we examine this historical instrument of restraint and torment, we gain not only knowledge about the past, but also insight into the present, ensuring that the lessons learned from such devices inform our ongoing efforts to create justice systems that are truly just, humane, and worthy of the societies they serve.